Okay, I'm going to go ahead and start. Welcome to the final session of going through the changes to the residential sales contract. Before we actually take a look at the contract, there's a couple items I'd like to make sure that you do when you deal with the contract. The first, always look at the bottom of the form that you are looking at. Look for the form number, whose form it is, and the date. So with this residential sales contract at the bottom of page 1, it is NVAR Form K 1321 revised 0122. And the reason I asked you to do that, I got a call this past week and an agent of ours got a contract that was on last year's form. And the question was, can they use that form? Yes, but it would be interpreted entirely different in a lot of paragraphs now with the changes that we've had here in this year. So you need to know which form you're working with. Also, you want to make sure it's not the Virginia Association of Realtor form, which is entirely different than NVAR's form. Okay. The second is make sure that you remember that anytime a word is capitalized in this contract and it does not begin a sentence, that means there is a written definition of that term in the contract. There's two ways of setting a term in the contract that buyer and seller have agreed to. Paragraph 29 of the sales contract is called definitions. This is what buyer and seller have agreed these words mean when they are capitalized throughout the contract. The other way of establishing a defined term is if you looked at page 1 of your sales contract, okay, and I'm going to bring it up here in a second. If you look at page 1 of your sales contract, well, let me do it for you now, in case you guys don't have it. Okay, the other way of establishing a definition in this contract is when a word is in quotation marks and capital letters. So whatever you put in this blank, offered on February 4th, 2022, that is date of offer. And throughout the contract, whenever it refers to date of offer, that is the date they are referring to. So if we went to paragraph 10 of the contract, one of the choices is property in the condition as of date of offer. That is the first blank in the contract because the D and the O are capitalized. The other time would be in paragraph 23. The total compensation that we're entitled to is whatever was offered by the listing broker as of the date of offer. That's the first blank in the contract. Everything else in this contract controlled by data ratification. And I'm not going to go into the explanation of that today. We've done it in other classes. I want to concentrate today on the changes to the contract. So for everyone who's joined me, I have you muted. If you would like to speak to me or ask a question, please unmute yourself. And then after we finish discussing with one another, mute yourself back so we don't pick up a lot of background noise for this recording. So the first change to this sales contract, you find right here in cooperating broker. In Virginia, the only party that can represent the seller is the listing brokerage firm. We do not have sub-agency in the state of Virginia. So if you are taking a buyer to another firm's listing, you have to be representing that buyer, okay? Which means you have to have a buyer-broker agreement. So they have done away with cooperating broker represents buyer or seller because you couldn't do that in our statute. So get it out of the form, what we have now. Okay. They also removed from this paragraph dual agency. There used to be an explanation of dual agency here, and said the form would be attached here to and made part of the contract. One of the ways they shortened this contract is they have removed a lot of statutory language that was not required, that made agents think since it was in the contract, it was negotiable, and it wasn't. So dual agency is discussed in the dual agency disclosure form or designated agency disclosure form. Okay. The statute says before I can represent someone as a dual agent, all parties have to agree to and sign the form before the transaction begins. So that language has just been removed from the contract. Any questions on what they've done with the first paragraph, with the preamble to this contract? Good. Next change, and some big changes. Price and financing, paragraph 2. The first thing they have done, if there's no financing, down payment equals sales price. Okay. They also moved sales price up top, was down at the bottom, real close to, seller subsidy, etc. So they've removed it, moved it up top. Housekeeping item. I often got questions, well, how do we fill this out if it's a cash offer? And I always just said, well, your down payment would equal your sales price. People were getting down payment confused with earnest money. Okay. And it's entirely different thing. So they just clarified that for you. Now, they've also seller subsidy. You see seller subsidy to buyer. Okay. They wanted to make sure that seller understood this was money that went to the buyer. And since it went to the buyer, you have to reduce your net by that amount. This used to be buried years ago in the financing contingency addendums. And a lot of times it would be missed by the listing agent, and they'd get to the table and lo and behold, 3% was, in the contract, and, 3% of the sales price, and the seller's getting a little upset, especially if they needed all that money to buy their next property. So I want to go take a look at the definition in paragraph 29 of seller subsidy, okay? Because they did some clarification there also. So here is paragraph 29 of your contract. Seller subsidy is a payment from the seller towards the buyer's charges, including but not limited to loan origination. You can read those. Seller subsidy reduces the total proceeds to the seller at settlement. They wanted to give that one more shot to this seller. Hopefully they read the whole contract instead of just the blanks. It is the buyer's responsibility to confirm with any lenders that the entire credit provided herein may be utilized. If lender prohibits seller from the payment of any portion of this credit, then said credit will be reduced to the amount allowed by the lenders. Make sure your buyer understands. Make sure that we can use all of this credit. If not, it goes back to the seller. You do not get any kind of a cash after settlement situation. That's fraud. Can't do that. Okay. So we have the seller subsidy. Hopefully that clarifies it for buyer and seller and the agents. Now the financing contingency paragraph has changed. Okay. This contract is contingent or is not contingent on financing. If it is contingent on financing, buyer will make written application, and remember, written application for both financing and lender required property insurance no later than 7 days after date of ratification. make sure that your buyer talks to an insurance company and gets a quote within the first 7 days. We need that. The lender needs that to make sure they qualify and that the property qualifies. And buyer grants permission to the co-op broker and lender to disclose to the listing brokerage and seller general information about the progress of the loan application and approval process. Doesn't mean that the financing company has to do that, but if they are willing to do it, they can give the permission. Now, this one is new for where it is in the contract. The appraisal contingency. This contract is or is not contingent on an appraisal. Okay. If this contract is contingent on financing and or appraisal, seller will provide appraisers reasonable access to property for appraisal purposes. If this contract is not contingent on financing and or appraisal, seller will or will not provide appraisers reasonable access for appraisal purposes. Now, this is where it gets a little confusing, okay? If it is showing here, right, that there's going to be a sales price of 200,000, they're putting 10% down, they're getting an 80% conventional and a 10% second, then you know there's financing. And if there's going to be financing, what lender is going to make a loan without an appraisal? Okay, I don't know of any. So a lot of people are waiving the appraisal contingency in their contract, but you still need to make sure that the appraiser can get in and do the appraisal. So you have to, as a buyer's agent, make sure it says seller will provide appraisers reasonable access for appraisal purposes. Okay. If you are what? Waiving the contingency. Okay.
I have a question. Can I ask?
Okay, sure.
Okay. If the house listed for 100,000 and we offer with escalation clause 120, and on escalation we waived the appraisal. What should we do here on the first page?
Well, you're not waiving the appraisal. You're just saying that it's not contingent upon the property appraising that in the addendum. But if
Right.
if any doubt, then check the seller will provide, because if there's a loan, the lender has to do an appraisal unless
That's right.
the property qualifies for exemption from an appraisal, and that means at least 30% down. And Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac have hundreds and hundreds of properties exactly like that in the neighborhood that they've done loans on. So the likelihood you're going to get one of those appraisal waivers, very unlikely. So, you know, if there is contingent, so if you use, so, and here's what gets a little confusing also. You use a conventional financing addendum form and you ask for the appraisal, but then with the escalation addendum, you waive it. So exactly what did you mean? Okay, so this is saying pretty straightforward. If it is contingent on an appraisal, they're going to let the appraisers in to do it. It's when you're waiving the appraisal that you've got to make sure that you can still get the appraiser in there. And look, listing agents, to counter a contract will not provide appraisers reasonable access, then how in the world, why in the world are you accepting a contract that says they're going to get a loan? Okay, we're butting our heads up against a wall doing that. Okay, so use some common sense with it. But they wanted to make sure, because how often did it said not contingent on an appraisal, and then your seller calls and says, hey, there's an appraiser wants to come in here. I thought this contract I accepted wasn't contingent on an appraisal. It's not contingent on what the amount it appraises for, but the lender still has to do the appraisal. And it goes on to say here in this paragraph, If this contract is not contingent on appraisal, buyer will proceed to settlement without regard to appraisal. Seller and buyer authorize broker to release sales price to appraisers who contacts them to obtain the information. And nothing in this subparagraph creates a financing contingency not otherwise agreed to by the parties. Now, we used to have a paragraph 11 in our sales contract. And paragraph 11 was access to a property. That has been dispersed throughout different paragraphs in our contract now. Okay. And this is one place where it is that they will allow the appraiser in if it is contingent on an appraisal or contingent on financing, basically. Okay.
Okay, but if, for example, in the same case, we put the down payment as a 50%, for example, if it's 100,000, we're going to put 50,000. In this, there is no risk for the bank to give us a loan, but the bank's supposed to get the appraisal anyway.
They have to get the appraisal to be able to sell it in the secondary market. So unless they're a portfolio lender that is going to hold on to it, they've got rules and regulations they have to follow to be able to sell it in the secondary market. So if they are a direct listen to me, don't butt me, okay? If the lender is a direct underwriter and they put the information into their system for Fannie Mae, the computer will come back and tell them whether or not there's an appraisal required. I'm telling you, not many people are getting the appraisal waived, and it's got to be done no matter what, because they need to sell the loan in the secondary market. Okay, so that's why there would still be an appraisal done. You say there's no risk to the bank, but what if the appraiser goes in there and finds a structural problem with the house or whatever, because they have to look for that for Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, or the lender comes back and says, we don't care, they're putting 50% down. This does not meet our requirements, because they decide what the appraisal is, not the appraiser. There's an appraisal reviewer with the underwriter that looks at these things. So there's a lot more goes into it than just coming up with a number that says, yeah, we're putting 50% down, so there's no risk. There is always a risk if they can't sell the mortgage, because then they have to hold on to it. Okay. And not too many lenders hold on to the mortgages, do they?
I agree with you, but in paragraph F, what should I do? For example,
paragraph F, you will put the seller will provide appraisers access to the property.
Right.
Because there's an appraiser's got to look. If there's a loan, check, seller will provide appraisers reasonable access to the property for appraisal. If they say they will not, then you're probably not going to get your loan, or you're going to put your buyer in default because they can't get their loan because the appraiser couldn't do the appraisal.
Oh, okay. It means on paragraph F, I have to check only one box, will, right?
Will, if you waived your contingency for an appraisal, then check they will, because they're still going to need an appraisal if there is a loan with the property.
Okay.
Okay.
If I have escalation clause, I waive that.
Yeah, well, if you're waiving it anywhere in the contract, you're waiving the appraisal, then make sure this box is checked here. Now, if you have a financing contingency for VA, FHA, conventional, then they're agreeing that they will allow the appraiser in. But when you waive it anywhere in your contract, that's when you need this blank. Okay, said will. Now, if it's a cash deal, they might say, no, I'm not going to let an appraiser in. You're paying cash. Why do you need an appraisal?
No, it's not
no,
about.
But listen to me. This is a game people play. We're paying cash, but we'd also like to see if we can get a what? A loan, so we don't have to put all of our cash in. Well, if you put here, on a listing, you put here that it's going to be a cash transaction, and you put down payment is equal to that, and you're asking for an appraisal. Okay, some people want an appraisal either way, but that sticks out to me like they're probably going to try to get a loan afterwards. Okay, so let's keep it simple. This form, if you don't have an appraisal contingency, check, they will allow the appraisers to come in if there's going to be a loan. And look, don't waive, don't say it's not contingent on an appraisal, okay? If it's VA, FHA, or USDA, it cannot be waived. Okay, they have the absolute right to void the contract, no matter whether they waive the appraisal or not. Okay.
Okay, this is not an additional assurance for the buyer if we will check the first box is not on the paragraph F is not contingent on appraisal. For example, it's not the 100,000 price. For example, it's 800, and we're going to put 40,000. And on top of that, we added additional 40,000 escalation. Should we check? Is not a
Oh, look, if in doubt, check the box that they will. You're gonna throw out every scenario there is trying to get me to change what I'm telling you, and it's not going to make any difference. If you're representing the buyer, you need to protect the buyer. If they're getting any kind of a loan, then they are going to need an appraisal. There is no lender in the world that's going to do this without an appraisal if they have to sell the loan in the secondary market. So if they're not a portfolio lender, check, they will allow an appraiser in the property. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, next paragraph here, G, this used to be a separate paragraph in the contract. It was paragraph 15. It is now here. Buyer will or will not occupy the property as a principal residence. If you know they're going to use this as a rental property, do not lie. Check this box, okay? Or you will find out what I call the 1440 rule, 14 months in jail, $40,000 fine for mortgage fraud. And I don't care if they are paying cash. This is required by statute. They will or will not occupy a property simply because of ratios for associations, et cetera, for ratios of owner occupant versus rental property for purposes of mortgage, obtaining mortgages for owner occupants. Now, paragraph 3, there's a big change, okay, big change. And this deals with your deposit, okay, and the amount of a check or a bank wired, not Bitcoin or blockchain or anything else, or a check and a deposit payable on whatever date held by the escrow agent. Whoever you put in here is the escrow agent. Now, here at the Tyson's office of Fairfax Realty, all checks have to be made out to a title company. It would not be Fairfax Realty of Tyson's. Okay. Now, buyer has delivered the check or will deliver. I'm not going to go into a long dissertation on this. Here's what DPOR says. You can't misrepresent who's holding the check. If this says RTS title and they hand a check to you, the agent, you don't work for RTS, I would check the box. They will deliver within 3 days or whatever. If it's made out to a company and they give the check to you, then you can say they have delivered the deposit to the escrow agent. The only way that you can check that they have delivered it to a title company is there's nothing to prevent them from giving the deposit to the title company before you even start out looking, and they could hold it for them. Okay. Now, DPOR also said, if you can't cash that check today, you have not received it, even if you're holding it in your hand. If I tell you, here's the check you want for 10 grand, but I have to make some arrangements, you understand what I'm telling you? Well, then you got a check that I will deliver the check, okay? Even though you have it in your hand, it hasn't been delivered because I can't cash it. So will be delivered within 5 days after date of ratification. Now, here's the big change. At midnight on this day, if you don't have the check, you need to let the listing agent know that the buyer has not delivered the check to the escrow agent. Okay. And it says here, and that would, and then we'd call the other side and they would yell it was a default. And I'd say, well, yeah, sort of, it's really a breach of terms. And you have to wait until the settlement date for it to be a true default. They've changed this up. If the buyer fails to timely deliver the deposit to the escrow agent, whomever is in that blank, as provided herein, seller may at seller's option deliver to buyer notice to void this contract. And upon delivery of the seller notice to void the contract, all respective rights and obligations of the parties arising under this contract are over. So it says here they would give it to RTS Title in 5 days. The 4th day, they give it to you and you don't deliver it to RTS immediately. And on the 6th day, the seller's got a better offer they want. So they deliver notice to void the contract. But your buyer says, I gave the check to the title company. No, you didn't. You gave it to Fairfax Realty's agent or whatever firm you're with instead of where it had to go. This is a dangerous area now. You got to be careful. You don't want to cause your buyer to lose a property over the check not being delivered to the proper person. Now, up until the time that the seller delivers this notice to your buyer, they can cure the default by delivering the deposit to the escrow agent prior to the seller delivery of the notice voiding this contract. Okay, so it's supposed to be there in 5 days. They haven't gotten a notice from the seller. 7 days, they bring the check to you. Well, then the default is cured. We go forward. Big change, right? Any questions about that change?
What is the maximum time that you can give the buyer to get the check? 7 days?
Whatever buyer and seller agree to.
Oh, okay. So there's no mandatory within 7 days or 5
Now,
days.
what was in this contract, what's been removed is some more of that statutory stuff that you're supposed to know as an agent. So they just took it out of the contract. It used to go into this long dissertation. If, you know, the escrow agent, if they're licensed by DPOR, has 5 business banking days to get the check into the bank. It went through all that, right? It was a whole paragraph. That is now gone. You're expected to know that if the check is given to Fairfax Realty, the escrow agent, then within 5 days after date of ratification, or these days, whichever is last, the check had to be in the bank within 5 business banking days. All that has been removed. All it says now is deposit will be deposited by escrow agent into an escrow account in accordance with applicable and state and federal law. And the reason they did that, RTS Title Company, okay, are they licensed by DPOR? No. So that five days didn't apply to them. Okay, it was only for licensees like us. So all that's been removed. So they cut this contract down by 2 pages by removing quite a bit of that kind of stuff out of the contract. Okay. They also moved, if you really cared about this, they also removed seller and buyer agree no escrow agent will have liability to any party on account of failure to disperse deposit except in the event of gross negligence, etc. That used to be in paragraph 28 of the contract. It is now here. And what they're saying, I've seen this clause many times. We'll give you the extension of the settlement date, but all parties to this contract agree that if you miss this next settlement date, then the title company or the escrow agent is instructed to refund, to give the check to the seller. And that happens. And then they come and want the Fairfax Realty or the title company to just give the check because that's what buyer and seller agreed to. It's not going to happen. Okay. An escrow agent is not going to cut the check to anybody until there's releases signed. Okay. So, and I know we've had other agents yelling and screaming and howling as they agreed to this. Yes, but we're escrows. We have to have everybody's permission to do it. Now, it goes on to say that, hey, yeah, as a broker, if it's in clear terms, then I can give the money out. But in order to do it, I have to send a 15-day, used to be 30, it's 15-day letter now saying, if no party objects, this is what I'm going to do in accordance with the contract. But if one party objects, I still can't cut it loose. You guys are going to have to get attorneys. Okay. Any questions about what they've done with paragraph 3? I like it.
Yeah, just a quick one.
Takes us out of the middle of it.
Just
Yes.
a follow up. So with the blank, instead of 5 days, we can put 10 days. There's no limit.
You can put whatever everybody agrees to.
Okay.
Okay. And look, if it's a short sale, okay, if it's a short sale, when does that buyer probably want to give you this deposit? After the bank approval, right?
Yes.
So there's a short sale addendum form that you can use that adjust all the dates in this contract. But if they don't adjust the dates, even in a short sale, that check would have to be in the bank within 5 business banking days after the agent receives it, unless there's instructions otherwise to hold it. Okay, or to delay it. But buyer and seller can agree in writing in a contract when the check will go into the bank. Next change, paragraph 4. How many settlement agents can there be? How many title companies can there be in a real estate transaction?
1.
1. Okay. Okay, and it now clarified in this
2. It's 2.
1. Okay, and it's clarified here in this paragraph now. Settlement agent. Buyer designates settlement agent, and they agree to contact the settlement agent within 10 days to schedule settlement. Settlement agent will order the title exam if required. Pursuant to the Virginia law, settlement agent is the sole agent responsible for conducting the settlement as defined in our code. Can there be a split settlement? Yes, but there's only one settlement agent. If this says RTS and the buyer and seller wants to have their own title company, they can do that, but they are not a settlement agent. They would actually be hiring the attorney for that settlement company. Okay. But there's only one. Now, can a settlement agent give legal advice to either party?
No.
No. If you want that, then you need to have an attorney on both sides. So you might have one settlement agent. You could have. Okay. So what is in a split settlement, what is the attorney for the seller do in a split settlement? What do they do? Answer questions for them. Okay. And they can get the stuff signed, but they're not working as a settlement agent. They're actually working as an attorney. Now, let's be realistic about this. How many buyers have you had come in and say to you, I will not use you as an agent unless I can use RTS title of Tyson's? Probably not. So who usually determines who this party will be?
Buyer.
Not the buyer. They have the right to designate, but how many
Usually-
buyers have a title company in mind? It's
Usually
usually
the agent.
It's
Yeah.
usually the agents, because we like to deal with people we know, like RTS. We like to deal with people here at Tyson's that we know are professional and will do the job right. And we're used to using them. Okay. But I've never had a buyer come in and say, I have to use one case that I was involved in. And the buyer said, I want to use this attorney, happened to be her uncle, who was a criminal lawyer. And it was the biggest fiasco I've ever been involved in. I actually had to take over and tell them how to do the settlement and make it work. Okay, I'll never forget that. That was about 40 years ago. Okay.
Larry,
Yes.
I have a question. How about
Okay.
sometimes, like, for the new constructions, like they say, if you use our title company, or if you use our lender, we'll give you a special, whatever credit.
Sure.
Mexico.
They can do that. But the buyer still has the right to say, no, I don't want that. I want to use my title company. Now, why do you think they want you to use their people?
Because they're making more money, of course.
They have an ABA problem.
Okay.
And some of I have a lender that he said he preferred to use a title company because that's gonna like easy communicating with the company that he knows, rather than having another company.
Sure. So they're very familiar with them, but they've also got all the title work and all probably prepared from,
Okay.
working. Years ago, I worked for Merrill Lynch, and we had a buy-in program, and anybody that used that pretty much had to settle with that title company because everything was already done. And the way they got you to do it, they gave you a what? Incentive to use it. Look, the settlement agent isn't going to be giving any what? Legal advice. They're there to see that this goes forward, and they take care of problems to help get it, things straightened out to get it to the table, but they're not working for either side. Okay. I want to go to paragraph 7 for the next change. And this is Virginia Residential Property Disclosure Act. They removed from this paragraph all the explanation by the statute. Okay. All the explanation by the statute. And because once again, you are expected to know the law. So the Virginia Residential Property Disclosure Act, that's all it's saying now, requires the seller to deliver the disclosure statement prior to acceptance of this contract. Okay. Prior to acceptance of this contract, unless the transfer is exempt. An exempt would be a husband and wife getting divorced, one giving it to the other, or partners giving it to one or selling to one another, et cetera. You can read the exemptions. Most cases, you're going to need it in a residential transaction. And it used to go on and say, and oh, by the way, if this isn't done, then the buyer has 3 days after they receive it, et cetera, to still void the contract up until settlement. You're supposed to know that. Also, when the buyer signs this statement, okay, that one-page form, they are acknowledging that they have been informed of the Virginia Residential Property Disclosure Act. So that's more of a housekeeping, take the superfluous language out and move it forward. Now, paragraph 8 and 9 did not change this year, but I just want to real quickly make sure everybody understands these paragraphs used to be 1.5 pages long. Last year, they pulled out all of the language, legal language that was in the statute that was in this contract that made people think, well, if it's in the contract, we should be able to take it out. It's negotiable. Well, statute doesn't allow it to be removed. I mean, doesn't allow it to be countered out. So all you have here is the mandatory required language that has to be in a contract. So the property is located, then it's subject to the POA Act. All 37 pages of the POA Act, not just what shows here in this contract, okay? And they have 3 days, okay, to after they receive it, or up to 7 days if we agree in writing and an addendum to the contract, to review the forms and bail out. But they also have the right, anytime up until the time they receive the forms or a notice that there will not be a form, to also walk. Larry, where does that say that in this contract? It used to be there, they pulled it out, okay? It is in the statutory language. So paragraph 8 and 9, we have statutory language that was removed. Make sure that you use, along with paragraph 8 and 9, use the NVAR form called Understanding Your Rights under the POA and Condo Act. It goes over everything that used to be in paragraph 8 and 9 and other parts of the statute, like all 19 things that are required for a complete package. And what if you don't get everything, you know, et cetera. So it's all built into that form. Use it with your buyers, especially. It's not something you add to the contract, you keep it in your folder. And I also use it with sellers so they know what the law basically says. Now, this is the big one and somewhat confusing, and I'm going to backtrack on it a little bit from what we did the first session. Property maintenance and condition, and they added the word inspections. So except as otherwise specified herein, seller of property free and clear of debris, broom clean, substantially the same physical condition as date of offer, date of home inspection, or other. And remember, except as otherwise contained herein, if you're doing an as-is contract, use the contingency and clauses addendum form and pull all these things out by having people initial and sign that addendum. They did add here, if no date is selected, then by default, it is the date of offer. Remember, seller has to have utilities in service through settlement. If the utilities are turned off in the house and they sign a contract that says they will have the utilities on, they should be turning them back on or take that out of their contract. And we put the hold harmless in here for us, makes sense. Now, buyer acknowledges, except as otherwise specified in this contract, plumbing, electric, appliances, heating, air conditioning, fixtures will convey an as-is condition as of date specified above. That used to be the last paragraph, and I think people missed that a lot. So they moved it up here, right up front so we can see it. Now, the contract is contingent upon a home inspection and or other inspections, or the buyer waives the opportunity to make the contract contingent. Yes, sir.
Yeah, can you give an example on the other options, that is a date of offer or date of home inspection or other? Can you give an example?
Well, what they're talking about specified herein. So in this contract, okay, the seller has to have the fire detectors, smoke alarms in a property, okay? And it's specified herein, even if you said as is. So you could go to that form and you could pull out right here, you know, the smoke detectors. No, we're not going to do that, okay? Or the big one would be in paragraph 20, okay? In paragraph 20, where it talks about unless otherwise agreed to in writing, will pay special assessments, will comply with all orders and notices of violations of local county authority, condominium, etc. So I could actually say you're buying my property as is, then I am not going to be responsible for anything the POA and condo comes up with. You're responsible for it. Okay. Those are the type of things you can pull out with that contingency and clauses addendum. Okay. If this contract is contingent upon home inspections and or other inspections, seller will provide broker, buyer, and inspectors retained by buyer reasonable access to the property to conduct the home inspections and or other inspections of the property. Okay. And in that home inspection contingency addendum, it says we have up until X number of days. You put 10 days or whatever to do the inspection. Okay, so that home inspection addendum still controls the inspection. So they moved this language also here from the addendum form and paragraph 11. Now this is where it gets tricky. Okay. If this contract is not contingent upon home inspections or other inspections, so you checked, waive the opportunity, okay? Seller will not provide access to anyone for the purpose of conducting inspections except for walkthrough inspections as provided below. However, if checked, seller will provide broker, buyer, and licensed applicable professional insured inspectors retained by buyer reasonable access to the property to conduct home inspections and or other inspections of the property beginning on this date and ending this date. So only if this box is checked would you do this. If this box is checked, there will be inspection, then you put NA, NA. Okay, not applicable. However, we used to have this written in the contract, and it never made sense to me. Home inspection for informational purposes only. Now, exactly what does that mean? Well, to me, that means we still want to have an out. We want to know about the property, but we know we're in a POA or a condo, and we want to make sure we have an out in case we don't like the inspection. So here's what a seller can now do with this paragraph. You know it's a POA and condo. You have the POA and condo documents already. You give them to the buyer. Seller gives them to the buyer upon ratification of the contract. Okay. And today's what, February 4th. They have 3 days to review them. So midnight, February 8th, it's over, right? So I might say, sure, I'll allow you reasonable access to begin February 10th and end on February 15th. So you can bring that inspector in, okay? But you don't have the right to void your contract, and you're not going to void it because of POA and condo, because we have that out of the way. Now, some people are putting in here, well, I want to make sure that I can bring inspectors in all the way until settlement. Well, I don't know of any seller, at least any seller of mine, that's going to allow this to be settlement date. We're going to limit when you can do it, and especially around the POA and condo.
Larry,
Yes,
so you said NA on those boxes. When will you use NA?
if you check, there will be a home inspection. Okay, you check, there will be a home inspection, right?
Right.
Then they've agreed here that they will give access to the people in accordance to the terms in the home inspection addendum, which says you have X number of days to bring the party in, correct?
Right.
But if you're saying it's not contingent, but they want that home inspection for informational purposes only, you don't have to write it's for informational purposes only. That makes absolutely no sense to me. But you could put in here, you could ask for them to bring in the buyer, you know, February 6th to 15th to give you a chance to do that. If I'm a seller and I have a POA and condo contingency, I'm saying after, you can bring it in after you reviewed your documents and you have this many days. Okay,
Okay,
does that make sense?
so we will put that date only after checking that, however, if checked seller. So we need to check that checkbox, right?
Well, as a seller, okay, if the seller doesn't want any inspectors or anybody in their property, they would just leave that box blank. Okay. So this is basically if your buyer wants to have a home inspection for informational purposes only, or, you know, they're going to buy the property no matter what, but they want to know about the wet basement or whatever. They can, then the seller could allow that party to come in, okay? But there's nothing that gives the party the right to void. If you want that, okay, if the party wants to be able to do an inspection with the right to void, then you're going to check, it is contingent on, okay, it is contingent on a contract, and they'll allow the inspectors in, and we use the home inspection contingency, which I'll take a look at here in a second. Okay.
Okay,
Now, this is some other language that came from paragraph 11, and there's a clarification. I've always maintained when you do your walkthrough, you do not have the right to bring an inspector. People would argue with me. They clarified it. Regardless of whether this contract is contingent upon home inspections and or other inspections, seller will provide broker and buyer reasonable access to the property to make a walkthrough inspection within 7 days prior to settlement and or occupancy. But if my seller said they could bring inspectors into the property all the way up until settlement, which one overrides? Okay, so I'm limiting as a seller, I'm not giving you till that. I'm giving you a limited time period, probably after you have removed the POA and condo, so that you don't have a right to void because of what you find in these inspections, if you're not using the inspection contingency form. Okay. I want to bring up the home inspection contingency form. Okay, so this is our home inspection contingency form now. Made some changes. They moved all this miscellaneous stuff up here. Okay, it used to be buried in the contract, and sometimes people didn't pay attention to it. Pursuant to the terms of the contract, you have to have utilities in service. Okay, if for some reason they're not in service, we can't do a home inspection. Then after you give us written notice, we still have 10 days or whatever after we get that notice that utilities are on to do our home inspection. Now, if the buyer fails to obtain the inspection, fails to deliver a copy of the reports to the seller, fails to deliver inspection contingency removal addendum or notice voiding this contract prior to the home inspection deadline, okay, then the contingency expires. We're in full force and effect with no home inspection or radon testing contingency. They can't mess up, okay? Okay, they have to deliver the copy of the report in either the contingency removal form or a notice voiding the contract. That did not say that they could send over a release of the contract. You have to void properly, and there's a form for that, okay? Now, we're in paragraph 2 and 3 here for home inspection with option, okay? Option to negotiate repairs. So we have until 9 p.m., X number of days after date of ratification. So they've agreed to a home inspection. This is where you put the days for coming in. No home inspection, you still want to do one for informational purposes, you fill out the blanks in paragraph 10. Okay? It still has to be a licensed and professional insured inspector, which means they have to what? Be licensed by DPOR. Now, this is very important change to this addendum. For the purposes of this home inspection contingency, it does not include radon, well, septic, except agreed by a separate clause or an addendum. They want to bring any kind of those people to test that stuff, there's a separate addendum. If the results of such inspections are unsatisfactory to the buyer and they don't have to give a reason, they can do one of two things. They can deliver to the seller prior to the home inspection deadline. Entire copy of the reports, written addendum listing the specific existing deficiencies of the property that they'd like to sell at a remedy, together with the buyer's proposed remedies, or a notice voiding the contract. So let's take a look at the new form for the removal. And I'm not going to go into a full blown thing on home inspections today. I'll do that another day, but let me. So this is your new home inspection contingency removal form. Okay. Now, you have to list the existing deficiencies and what you want done, but here's the change to this form. Unless otherwise specified above, all repairs have to be done by a contractor licensed to do the type of work required. Receipts or written evidence completed prior to buyer's final walkthrough inspections of the property. Now, that doesn't mean you have to like the way my contractor did it. As long as they did in accordance with the county standards and whatever, get over it. But if the sellers make any repairs in this addendum, then seller will provide broker, buyer, licensed, applicable professional insured inspectors retained by the buyer, reasonable access to the property to make the final walkthroughs within 7 days prior to settlement. So if the seller has agreed to make repairs, then the buyer does have the right to bring their home inspector back with them to make sure the work was done properly. If it was a home inspection and the seller did not do any repairs, then at walkthrough, it's just going to be the agent and the buyer. If there was no home inspection at walkthrough, it's only going to be the agent and the buyer. Okay. Now, quite frankly, I do not understand why any seller would agree to make repairs today, simply because the supply chain challenges. Can we even get the material? Can we get the new refrigerator? Can we get any of that stuff? And can we get the contractors to do it? So I'm probably going to negotiate some kind of a fee for the buyer to get the work done themselves or at another date, et cetera. You know, that's something you have to address when it comes up, but it's pretty hard to get anything done right now, especially in a short amount of time. Okay, I'm going to go back to the contract because I want to cover a few more changes here to it, and then we'll call it a day because you've been with me quite a while here. Okay, I want to go back here to new paragraph 11, possession date. They have added to this, okay? Seller will transfer exclusive control of any smart devices to buyer at settlement. We've had situations where the seller was upset with the buyer and they never transferred from their iPhone the control of all this electronic stuff in the house. And they were turning the heat off in the middle of the night, turning lights on, turning alarms on, etc. So now they're calling for you to relinquish control. And under paragraph 13, they say, okay, smart devices, okay? Any smart home devices, whether installed, hardwired, or attached to personal property, become property of the owner, not limited to smart switches, thermostats, doorbells, security cameras, do convey unless otherwise agreed to in writing. They also, with this paragraph, there's no more yes, no, or not applicable. It's either yes, it goes, or no, it does not go with the property. If it doesn't go, you just don't check yes. They also added here, as is, no additional value for seller convenience only for things that are being left, because it caused heartburn for lenders. If a lot of personal property was being left, then they had to account for that in their appraisal, maybe even back some value out. So anything that's being left has no value. Paragraph 17. WDI, wood destroying insect report, has to be done within 90 days. Okay, has to be 90 days. Now, if the WDI report recommends treatment and or repair, seller will provide buyer, their representatives, appropriate party, reasonable access to perform this duty, because once again, the general paragraph for getting people in have been removed, so they moved it to appropriate paragraphs. Any treatment or repairs identified in the report will be at the seller's expense, and seller will provide written evidence of the treatment prior to the date of settlement, which satisfies this paragraph. You're a buyer's agent. Who should be paying for this term? Who should be paying for and selecting the termite company? I think the buyer. Why would you let the seller? Why would you let the seller choose, right? If I'm the seller, I may want to try to limit how much money I have to pay if it's your company, but we'll get into that another day. Paragraph 20, okay? Time is of the essence. Controls this paragraph now, period, okay? There used to be a bunch of language in this paragraph that said, if the title work isn't ready by time of settlement, then the contract, this is automatically extended for 10 business days, etc. That is all gone. If you put 30 days, your buyer better be able to settle in 30 days. If you allow 30 days for your seller to have a settlement, then they better be able to settle, okay? There better not be anything wrong with their title. They better be able to settle. If not, time is of the essence kicks in. Now, that used to say, okay, if there's a title problem, then at settlement, then the buyer could void the contract at settlement, or the buyer could what? Sue for damages, or we could do an extension. That's all been removed. It's understood. Those are options they have, but who should they be discussing those options with? Their attorneys, not us, right? Now, there's a real important thing that was added to this paragraph. Real important, okay? Title may be subject to easements, covenants, conditions, restrictions of record, if any, as of date of ratification. This used to say date of settlement. So technically, I could put an easement on my property between the time of ratification and settlement, and I hadn't done anything wrong. Now, I can't do that. So if I have a landlocked piece of land that I need to have access across your property, I have to have that on there before the contract's ratified, not after. So I like that change. I think it was necessary and needed, okay? Now, let's go to paragraph 26, which used to be the 28. Used to be a clause in here that the broker could, if they wanted, agree to accept half of the liquidated damage deposit in lieu of commission. That's been removed. because it said may anyway, and the broker and the buyer and seller didn't have to agree to that. So it's whatever is negotiated. When it comes to a void contract, they added the words if any, and here's why. Contract becomes void, no further force and effect without default by any party. Both parties immediately execute a release directing the deposit, if any, be refunded in full. And that's because, go back to that paragraph now for earnest money. I said I would bring the check to you within 5 days. I haven't. It's the 7th day, and the seller voids the contract. Well, there was never any deposit delivered, so how could a deposit be returned? So it says if any, but even if there was no deposit, you still need a release signed. Okay, so if the contract becomes void and no further force and effect, all parties still say they will execute a release. Okay. Paragraph 30. Time is of the essence. Means the dates and time frames must be met. Failure to meet stated and date time and dates or time frames result in contractual or waiver of contractual rights or default under the contract. It is over, right? At midnight on the day of settlement, it no longer exists unless all parties have agreed to extend it in writing. And that's even in reference to paragraph 20. Everybody understand, your buyer has to be able to do what they said. Now, this paragraph used to say, unless the loan wasn't ready because of a Tyler RESPA Integrated Disclosure Act requirement. No one ever used that. They pulled it out. And all that simply meant if the interest rate increased by 1/8% or more between the loan estimate and the closing disclosure, it required a new 3-day disclosure, prepayment penalty added, etc. So really never came into play, so they pulled it out. Because it made people think that, well, the loan's not ready, so we're good to go. That's not what it said. Okay. And paragraph 32 is your new catch-all paragraph. Anything that they didn't cover in others here, including typewritten or handwritten provisions included in this contract, control all pre-printed provisions of the contract, in conflict. So there used to be a paragraph right here above data ratification, and it was called other. And agents put all kinds of stuff in there, okay? Thinking that they really understood law when they went to law school. So they pulled it out so you wouldn't do that. You need to use addendums, no more writing in other, okay? Because when you wrote other, you might have been undoing something else, like home inspection for informational purposes only. And you used the home inspection contingency where they had the right to void the contract if they didn't like it. Well, you just said informational purposes only. You hand wrote that in. That would control the pre-printed, then you would have had the right to void. So we didn't want you practicing law. They pulled that out together. Also remember, here in this paragraph, provisions not satisfied at settlement will survive delivery of the deed and not be merged therein. So buyer and seller still have the right to sue each other over the contract after settlement. There's 2 more things I want to cover. Let me get rid of this contract.
Larry,
Yes,
the statute of limitations to sue even after settlement is what? It's still 3 years?
I don't know. Need to talk to an attorney on that one. I'm not sure. I thought it was 7, but you need to talk to an attorney on that one.
All right, thanks.
This is the information for making an offer optional form. All you listing agents should be using this form, fill it out with your seller and download it into Bright so the buyer agents have all the information they need to fill out a contract. It can't be made part of the contract. It's informational purposes only. But here's what they added for you as a listing agent and seller. Seller requests proof of funds with a cash offer or lender letter. If you're sending over a cash offer, show us that you can really do it. Okay, otherwise, owner may not accept your offer. Another form they have come up with, they've come up with a new buyer offer cover sheet, which is also optional, but you can send this over with your offer. So you highlight everything in the contract, and they added this box here by checking here. Co-op broker requests in accordance with 1-7 of our code of ethics that the listing broker or agent affirm by signing below and promptly returning to the co-op broker that this offer has been submitted to the seller or has waived the obligation to have this offer presented. Because we often wonder, was our offer ever even presented? And our code of ethics changed last year to allow you to ask the listing broker and they must respond. They added it here to help you out. Okay, so that's a new form and new request. And that are basically the changes that they have made to our contract form. I know it's a lot to digest. Monday, I will be doing a session Monday, not like this, an Ask Larry session. I'm going back to Ask Larry. I've been going over this contract for a month now. But if you have a further question about something we discussed, bring it up Monday and we'll revisit it. I'm not saying I won't go to the contract, just not going to do the complete,
Can
run
I
through.
ask a quick question before you sign off?
You may ask a question. I don't know how quick it will be.
Okay, it's the home inspection. The
Okay.
home inspection for information only where you could void, is that valid anymore or not?
Yes, but you need to use the home inspection addendum form, not write in the contract home inspection for informational purposes only. Let me
Okay.
bring the form back up. Okay. Proper way to do it. Okay, so you have options. You have options on this form. Okay, home inspection and negotiate or home inspection with the option to void only. So if they want to still be able to void, use this. They have no right to ask for anything to be fixed. It gives you time to get into the property and void.
Yeah.
So if this is the case and you're using this form, then it gives you X number of days after date of ratification. Back in paragraph 10, you just put NA in those other ones. You only use that if there is no inspection contingency form. So if they want to still void for home inspection and it's informational purposes only, use this, do it properly.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you everybody for joining me today. We had a good group here today. We had like 31 people, so that's good. Spread the word, and I will answer any other questions you have about it on Monday. I'll be coming to you from Daytona Beach on Monday, but I will be here on Zoom.
Thank you.
Thank you guys for joining me.
Thank you, Larry.
You're
Thank you,
welcome.
Larry.
All right.
Thank
See
you,
guys.
Larry.
Thank you.
Bye.
Yeah, you're welcome. I'll see you guys in the next class, hopefully.